It's weird.
Okay, well, it works now, so that's cool. Maybe it's just my other earpiece. Okay, so we could go to sense perception and volition, which was chapter 2. Can you see that file?
Yes, I have it open.
All right, I've crossed out. If you scroll down, you'll see I've crossed out stuff we've already discussed. So then we can just go.
I see where we left off.
Okay, so let's have a look at the choice to focus or not is man's primary choice, but is not his only choice. Okay, aside from involuntary responses such as bodily reflexes or human action, mental and physical are chosen by the actor. This is more a question of psychology. Like a lot of, and I think we discussed a bit of this last session as well, where like if you sit there, your brain just throws things at you. That's not voluntary, right? That in the default state, a lot of mental, should we call them actions? I don't know. Mental things are not voluntary. They just come up. Like association is the only one I could think of. Are there any others?
Well, first I would distinguish how far away the result of a decision is. Like, for instance, reflexes, at no point does your thinking have any impact on that. It just does what it does. Like when you hit your knee and it kicks out.
Yeah.
There's no decision there at all.
Yeah.
As far as something like your mind wandering, the material that you end up thinking about would be related to what you have thought about in the past or knowledge you have, or like randomly memories popping up, which they aren't really voluntary to think of those thoughts, but it's not completely without influence from you, unlike reflexes, because it's dependent on what you already know and think you've done in the past. So there could be things like habits, like you can know how to swing a baseball bat and hit a ball in a almost habitual way without thinking about it, but you know it's related to the training you put in. But the way you move your muscles at each individual moment, well, that's not a decision. It's just kind of going through autopilot. So I'm just distinguishing the distance you could have from your control.
I like that.
So, let's see the context of Peikoff's statement.
It was in that chapter, human actions, mental and physical, as both caused and free.
Yeah. So at least insofar as this topic, this context, he's talking about things that result from the choice to focus, mostly when you're deliberately trying to accomplish a thought. And that's part of your continual selection of alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really a selection of alternatives if your mind is wandering. I mean, I wouldn't say it's involuntary exactly, but because it's related to things you've thought about, but it's not really a continual selection here. That's not the type of choice we're trying to talk about here. Or like choice to focus, choice to follow certain thoughts, a choice to take certain particular actions at a particular time. Like if you decide you want to go, like in general, you're going to step up to bat with the baseball bat in your hand. I mean, that's the type of continual selection we're talking about. I mean, that didn't happen by accident or just randomly or involuntarily.
Yeah.
Unless maybe you didn't choose to focus and you're kind of like in a not really reasoning state, kind of just somewhat thinking but not quite. We've talked about that before too. Like how much are you in, like, are you kind of like a zombie? Are you really, or are you really thinking these things through? Or are you doing things deliberately?
Yeah. So, okay, so you're saying it was distance from the, how did you describe it? There's a distance from something.
Distance from the initial choice.
Distance
think
from the
that's
initial choice. Oh, okay. So, like that refers to then, if I have a mental association, you're saying maybe in the past I chose to evaluate something in a certain way, okay, came to some conclusion, and
right.
so that stuck with me, and then
Yeah,
it can come up later, but it was still, even though I didn't think about it now, it's from a past choice, like a past thinking, past thought.
yeah. I mean, there is research into that with memory research, as far as activating related concepts. So we know we're not choosing like, oh, when I think of apple, I'm going to think of bananas too.
Mm,
I mean, it's not. I mean, yeah, you chose it to the extent that you made an association of them together as fruit, but it's not like in the moment you literally connected went to apple to banana. It's not like you did that with full focus. It just kind of happened. But the association came about a long time ago.
okay.
It's nothing like that's why it's more like memory, because you're recalling something and or going back to something you had already formed. Or the memory's there already, you're just accessing it.
So then the beliefs that you form early on, they become sticky. Like it's hard to undo because it's constantly coming up as with associations that are selecting according to whatever the thoughts were in the past.
Yeah. Or
Mm,
you're making use of those thoughts in the past to create new ones. So it's not like it's in a vacuum that these ideas pop up.
yeah,
But you can call them but you can still distinguish to what extent, like how immediate this decision is, or how far back does the choice extend. Maybe an example would be that it could be somebody's fault that they become addicted to heroin or something like that. But it's not that right now they can decide not to take heroin. It relates to their decision way back when
mm,
they first decided to do it.
yeah,
And that's the way extent they're blameworthy. Even though now in no sense is it voluntary that they're taking drugs. Like even addicts explain how they feel like they lose a sense of choice, even that they feel like they cannot choose otherwise. But it's not because they lost free will per se, or it was an accident that happened. Rather, it was a consequence of some decisions they made a long time ago, which unfortunately had consequences now.
yeah. And you could say the same then for any psychological issue someone has, like whether that's um, insecurity in a relationship, or it's uh, I don't know what else would be an example, like unproductive ways of thinking about their own like abilities. Some of those things might be automatic and they're just from past decisions, and maybe they're even from childhood when you weren't thinking properly.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to be an error as much as like it still was just it doesn't have to do with making mistakes necessarily, just that these decisions began much earlier than you
Yeah.
might realize.
Okay. When you say it's, what do you mean? It doesn't necessarily have to do with mistakes. What do you mean?
Well, sometimes it's just, I mean, it's not wrong that well, you can have good consequences too for the same reason you can have bad consequences. You would still say praise your effort and work into becoming, I don't know, a great stock trader or something. It's not that like it's not like you decided one day you magically became good at it. Like you decided, but then there's a lot of consequences as a result of your work or something. Like, or you could choose like, oh, I took this job, and then it leads to success down the line. You want to say, oh, I couldn't have predicted that or something. Like you want to acknowledge that you're made some decision a while ago, predicting or hoping or had good reason to believe you'd do well from there. That's kind of what I'm saying.
Mm, I don't think I followed. So you can make a decision in the past and it could be a mistake. Like an error as if you don't recognize
Yeah.
it, but it still results in good consequences. Is that,
No,
I
I
didn't
was
follow.
trying to say, in contrast to the addict, I was saying that you could say, imagine you became a billionaire stock trader, and it's not like you just decided. It's a result of many voluntary actions that got you there.
Yeah, that's
Even
true.
though it wasn't really up to you per se
Yeah,
to make yourself a billionaire today. It was
yeah,
about all those things you did in the past. You don't only want to look at what you did in the immediate now, but also what you've done in the past, because
yeah, that's
those
true.
things have consequences as well.
That's true. And then so applied for, if we apply that to just like someone now in the now and wanting to change for the better, then it would just be like piece by piece analysis of like when things come up. It'd be hard work. I'm like, it's so hard to change then because everything is automatic. But it would be like what's that Viktor Frankl's concept of the space between stimulus and response, something like that, where you have
Yes.
the stimulus and then you're like, this is how I would respond, and you try think through it rationally, and then that's painful because every single time you want to change something you have to rethink it, and like that's even just the
Right.
thinking itself is hard. Like that I could be sitting here thinking about some idea for like 4 hours and still not get it in order to change my response to something. But yeah, so
Yeah,
that would be the application to personal change now. It would be, well, yeah, there are things in the past that have an impact on me, and to change them I must think and do something in that space between stimulus and response.
but it also tells you that you need to think of the now as well, because you know what you do now can affect the future so much. You really need to think in the now as well. You
Wow.
can't just go impulsively,
Yeah.
because we recognize that our voluntary choices are, in a sense, voluntary consequences. I don't like the way I phrase that. Like these aren't things that happen merely automatically. It's always had to be deliberate, and there's many pieces built on it. And you might lose sight of where you began, but you're still building up from some point, from some decision.
Right. Like me choosing to study philosophy for an hour a day. Like, where will that go? I don't know. I'm doing it for a reason, but
Yeah,
and if I'm consistent, then that results in me getting to some point in the far future that, looking back on it, it's okay. Okay, you got a dog. Looking
yeah.
back in the future, it's like, yeah, that those things have, I can see how they have consequences. But it's hard to, I sent you that quote that Peikoff had in the what was it, in the book, where, so if you really proved an idea, it should stand in your mind like that truck,
Yes.
as a fact that is there, real, perceivable, unanswerable, absolute. It's quite hard to, um, like in terms of little actions that I take, like in this moment, do I focus or not? Do I think about doing this or that, or do I go for a run every day or not? Like it's hard to see with the vividness of a truck what consequences that would have in shaping my personality over the long run. But like those, I can see how that's important. I just don't, having the vividness of the consequences is like, I don't see how you, I don't know yet. I'd like to know if you can get there, but I don't see how you would. Does that
Well,
make sense, what I'm asking? I'm sort of getting
it
at like,
does.
yeah,
Well, that's why I gave the example of a heroin addict specifically, because that's a vividness in my mind to illustrate this to myself, even.
okay.
That's what I could see as an example of something that doesn't seem voluntary at all, but on some level it is if you trace it back far enough.
Got it.
But that's easy to think about with a vivid example like that,
Yeah.
because you know that at some point I had to choose to take heroin, whether at some point they weren't addicted.
But then, yeah, with an extreme example, okay. But then
Right.
with the little ones, like it would be, because it's hard to foresee how little choices, like in one moment,
Right.
whether I
Little
choose to,
choices.
yeah.
Um,
And that's applicable to us, right? In day-to-day life and living. Like if we're thinking in terms of morality and like living the best life possible, then being able to foresee, like if I choose this, I don't want to end up there. If I choose this,
Yeah,
yeah, I want
true.
to end up in this, you know?
There are. You're right about that. I don't want to always think in terms of extremes. That's more just illustrate the general principle. But how would I do that for, say, like just eating well that day?
Yeah,
It's not really any immediate thing, but you would have to think in terms of maybe imagine a time you ate healthy for all of a day and then how you felt that day or things like that you might be able to do. I mean, those are sort of vivid instances you can think of. It's just a matter of finding an example of where that thing happened, which of course that's tricky because you need to figure out which facts matter. But I like to think of, say, nutrition is a really good way to start thinking about that, or say how much TV you watch in a day. I mean, it might not be obvious what you're missing out on, but you need to. It's a difficult thing. I don't know how to answer that any better, actually.
Does morality provide some kind of framework for because there are virtues and they are supposed to be abstract ways of behaving to give you the best life possible.
Yeah.
And are there any good like ways to concretize that? Like maybe through, for example, I bookmarked Frank, or what was his name? Frederick Douglass's biography, and maybe biographies, maybe stories. I don't know. So like, how did it? Because you that extract you gave me of Aristotle looking at people with pride, like he would have looked at actual people with pride, and so, and then, so is there some kind of like way to concretize like these are the specific habits I need to practice every day and in this and this and this choice in order for me to become like that person or that person or that person, you know?
Yeah, it takes a lot of breaking down, I guess. One thing to mention about vividness, I usually think of that as a way to simply recall the concept, but even if it's extreme, because if you recall an extreme example, like you'll pretty much know right away it is an extreme, and you just need to use it as a way to grab on the essential principles involved. It's not necessarily saying this is the only thing you think about, but when you recall this, if I recall the heroin addict, it's not that I only think in terms of what addicts do, but I can better recall the relevant information. Like
Yeah.
how far back did you make a choice? Um, how wide is the time scale? How difficult is it to change? Um, does it change if the implications are not as life changing? Things like of that variety. Like I start thinking of different aspects of it right away, even if I don't want to think of that extreme example. It's a way of like activating my other concepts, so to speak.
Yeah.
Like I said about the apple into banana, like if you activate one concept, you'll probably activate related ones.
By association.
Yes.
I know what you mean with the extreme example, although to me the ideal would be if you could find one from your own life that has,
Yes.
like I'm trying to find something relevant to what we're discussing here from this fiction book that I'm reading. So I could tell you that there's the scene, so it's the same, that Japanese book that I'm reading, I sent you some quotes from. And it's interesting because it begins with two friends from the same village. One is called Musashi, and he's the historical samurai figure, and then his friend Matahachi. And so they begin together, just like in The Fountainhead, there's Howard Rourke and Peter Keating. And you see how they diverge paths based on these little choices they make throughout life. And so Matahachi just sort of on a whim decides to run off with this woman and leave his wife. And you see him just like the snowballing consequences of him deciding to just like spend all these years with her, drinking, loafing around, not really doing anything. Um, and and then there's a scene where they meet again, and he's speaking to him, Matahachi speaking to Musashi, and he's saying like, I've done nothing with my life, like it's wasted. He's like 22 or whatever. And Musashi says to him like, um, even that is a lesson. And so you can do something with it. It's got value, something like that. Because I can't find the quote exactly. And so the point is that Matahachi has this strong memory and I have similar memories and regrets. And he's got this strong memory and this massive regret and sorrow about the choices that he's made and where he is now. Like that's vividness, And so maybe if you're very well versed in moral principles, you might be able to identify more in your life that you regret, which to me would be a positive because it means you've made those identifications and then you hold those things. So yeah, you can hold the extremes, but if you can somehow find specific things from your life, that to me would be, I mean, that's where I want to go. Like the more I can, let's say there are things now I don't regret, but after learning philosophy, I'll regret them because I'm like, I knew I shouldn't have done that. That's not who I want to become. Then that's a positive because that means I've changed and I've identified something new. And then that's my hook instead of like maybe to start with the extreme example is fine, but I want to get to the point where that's my hook. And it's like, no, I don't want to be the person I was then, So yeah.
Yeah, it is hard to think of the vividest examples that are more personal to you. In a way, like, how can you have the personal examples unless you've already done this already? It's like, can you find an example where it all went right? Maybe not. I mean, you're not going from a perspective where you made every decision correct. You can't come from a perspective where you're looking for an example because maybe you didn't really think of it until now, this way of thinking, so you won't have an example.
Yeah.
Maybe you will, or you just need to think ahead, like try to project. But that's also the value of thinking about the value of fiction or even biographies, because that gives you at least something, some way to project ahead different actions.
Mm-hmm.
This might be the easiest way to do it, because that time you do have a context of a large span of somebody's life, and you do have enough content to work with.
Yeah, I agree with that's well more so since I've started reading this book Musashi. I definitely agree with that. The one thing that's been very, very, very strongly concretized for me is the decisions we make accumulating over a life and turning us into who we are. And because I see how these characters are developing after different scenes and experiences and choices they make and ways they face the world. Like one will get into a fight and choose to do the honorable thing and live by his moral code, even if it doesn't make sense, the moral code, but he's choosing to live by this moral code. And then there's a scene where he's described as having this intense presence, whereas his friend Matahachi, like, of course he would have this intense presence after like fighting off, 100 men or whatever it is. And then Matahachi's been like just loafing around, drinking, doing nothing. And so that it's just heavily concretized, like all those little things accumulate over life, and in battle, like choices he makes that are automated because of past things he's practiced. And so, I mean, yeah, and then to take it back to my life, so yeah, fiction does that, and that's why I'm reading more of it. And then I find that as I learn more and recognize more of my mistakes in the past, then I get the reference points. But sometimes I don't know, like I made choices in the past that I didn't know were mistaken. I didn't know they were erroneous. I don't know if that's the way to put it. And then later, when I realized they were erroneous, then I really regretted them. So, but I maybe can come to more realizations through this, right? Through not just fiction, but studying philosophy, and then more morality and ethics, and then being able to better think about problems and day-to-day living.
Yeah,
That seems
I
like the
think
way.
that's the gist of it.
Yeah.
There's a lot more detail I could add to it, but
Yeah.
I think that sounds correct.
Add more detail. Why not? Do it.
Well, it made me think of how memories seem to often, well, the memories of the past seem to relate closely to thinking in the future. That thinking into the future is a matter of projecting our memories of the past. We're constructing a memory, so to speak. Like you're putting all this information together to create this memory of the past, something you did in the past or some event like a birthday party, say. And you could assemble other memories together to then project into the future. So in a way, this imagining the future is about projecting from the past.
Yeah.
Like piecing together all this information and projecting into the future. And that might be the only way to even project into the future, that you recall all these other this information, piece it together and think about it in a future context. Like in a way, it's like simulation.
Explain that last bit again, sorry. So I understand it makes sense, you use your memories, because memories include concepts, and I assume they include concepts, I don't know, but they include concepts and the material we use to then assemble a future, or project the future. But what was that latter bit that you were talking about with?
It's like simulation.
Yeah.
The fact that you're piecing these thoughts and memories together, you're simulating a future state. You're simulating what things would be if things continued, or you're simulating what things would be if the context changed. And that seems to be a lot of what episodic memory, which is memory of events in your life, that seems to be how it works. That's always about imagination. You're projecting from information some base knowledge and then
I thought it was the duck because I heard little footprints.
Yeah, that she distracted me.
Okay, it's all right.
Yeah, so just saying that a lot of memory has to do with projection. Even memory into the past, you're taking some facts that you know, building on them, and then constructing what that event was in your life. And the same for the future. Like you're taking all this information of specific facts, piecing it together, then simulating what would be in this particular context.
Well, I didn't understand the projection into the past. And there's this, I understand you use memories to project into the future, but I didn't understand why is it projection into the past?
Because it's not that in your mind somewhere there's like 5 neurons that when they activate, you also activate a memory of the past, like a memory of a birthday party you went to when you were 5 years old. You're projecting because you're taking information of simple facts and piecing them together to form a memory of an event. So you're projecting to the future if you're thinking about the future, or projecting the past if you're thinking about, well, what did I do in the past that was wrong, or why did I regret this decision about the past? Like you're re-simulating what had gone on in the past.
Oh, okay, but I didn't see that. Maybe I don't know. I don't understand the mechanism or whatever. I just thought recalling memory is different from projecting.
Oh no, I meant in the same way. I meant projecting as in taking your memories and imagining the future.
Okay, so you're saying the process is similar if I project the future and if I look into the past and reflect on what I did?
Yes, because you're simulating things that could occur if these facts were put together again. Like imagining everything was the same. Like if you're sitting at a picnic table in front of an ice cream cake or something in the past, and you could start simulating what had happened. Like you're thinking about the time you threw cake at somebody. Like, did you regret it or not? Like you're starting to piece it together again based on facts of how you know ice cream cake. Can you even grab ice cream cake? Or was it cold on your hands, or things like that? It's not all there to begin with, but
Oh,
you're
okay.
recreating it. You're
I understand.
adding facts to and recreating it in your mind.
So it's not necessarily accurate.
Not necessarily, but it often is. But that's why there can be mistakes, because we're piecing together facts inappropriately.
And we're
But yeah,
recalling memories that support our conclusion, but not recalling the ones that counter the conclusion.
it can sometimes.
I
But
do
that's
that. That's
yeah,
my experience. Like I'll believe something and then I was like, hang on a second, if that's true, then what about this and this experience? So that happens to me.
yeah. And so I'm relating that to you trying to come up with examples of, well, how do I know these small choices? How do I see how they impact me in the future?
Yeah.
Well, on some level, you're just trying to project from these facts, creating a simulation and see what life would be like in, say, 10 years or in 5 hours, if that's the impact of the thing you're doing.
hmm Yeah, I've been trying to, as a practice, think more. Even today, this was actually just randomly today. I asked myself, like, I told myself, try and live like this is another day 10 years from now. So, and the reason I said something like that is because I tend to, I might say, all right, let me just smash as much work as I've done, but there's infinite work forever to get done. And I could, if I approach things like it's like one thing to conquer and get on top of, then I'll never get on top and I'll just be working my whole life and I'll never take a break. You know, I don't know if that makes sense, but so I try to approach it like projecting into the future of like, yeah, you know, there's work, but there's other things too, like going for a walk in the sun, going for a run, um, and not live like today is the only day and I have to conquer all this work. So yeah, projecting in terms of like thinking, if I did this every single day, this habit, who would I become 10 years from now? I don't know. Some of the things that I do, I don't know who I'll become, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a hard question, but that's
Yeah.
essentially what you would be doing.
But I guess philosophy helps answer that in that it gives the broad principles that are supposed to help
Right.
you have a fulfilled life. So you don't necessarily know the exact person you'll be, which is maybe the work of a fiction writer, which you do some of, but you won't like that. So yeah, it's more for the fiction writer, but philosophy's just there to guide you so you end up fulfilled.
Yeah,
Maybe that's the answer.
it's like how to piece together the facts,
Yeah.
like what facts are relevant, what facts you want to project with, and then even in the future, if you get there and things don't turn out that way, you might wonder, well, was I wrong all along, or did I make a mistake, or something else?
Yeah. Um, since you mentioned like we project our memories into the future. We project into the future using our memories from the past. What about someone who has like, let's say they have a very tragic view of the world, and like then they would also remember like only bad or sad things from the past, and so changing that would also be like, I don't know, like how would anyone, you know what I'm saying? Because like you take Viktor Frankl's approach, stimulus response, that would require like constant rethinking on everything basically, and you're looking at like a 20-30 year project or something like that, I would think, if you want a complete shift in like I mean tragic is one example, but you could take any sort of extreme or anxious, um, a complete reorientation of like the way of living would be, just seems like it would almost be, these things are like permanent. They're like permanent imprints. I don't see any, unless they want to work like 3 hours a day or whatever to like reconfigure their brains. Um,
Well, I see what you mean why it's hard, but a way to do that, to really reset, so to speak, is completely change your living environment. Like David Bowie, he wanted to stop cocaine.
yeah,
He did way too much cocaine. He
yeah,
wanted to stop. It was affecting his music production. So he moved to Berlin and lived there for like 4 years. He didn't speak German. He wasn't as famous there as in America. So it's like his life completely changed form when he went to Berlin. And that was a way to change his attitude about life. Yeah, it's hard, and you really gotta work hard at it. You need a substantial shift in your life, the bigger change you need.
But I don't see why, like, if, okay, with the example of David Bowie, like, is it just the fact that he moved to Berlin? Because I don't see why just a shift in environment on its own is a recipe for positive personal change. Like,
You're
isn't there
right.
some formulation for like what environment or like what yeah.
I think you're right. As far as breaking habits, that could be enough. But if you want the right habits, well, yeah, there's so much more to take into account. But if you're trying to undo habits, you really need to be in a new environment to get through that. It almost doesn't matter
Yeah.
where you are as long as you're in a new place, new environment, new associations to make new habits of thinking,
Right.
new routines in your life. All those little things will change if you move somewhere completely radically different.
Yeah.
Or even not even radically different, just like if I imagined I just left here and lived in California instead for 2 years, I'm sure I would change because my thinking, well, I'm sure certain habits would change. I might not fundamentally change as a person, but that's because I'm not trying to.
Yeah. The
But I
question,
would still change to some extent.
yeah, you change in non-essential ways. The question is whether you change in an overall positive way, and how you, if you're talking about environment being a trigger for that, how you then select an environment that would direct you towards. I have a friend who's choosing to move to LA for that reason because he's in from Melbourne, which is a different city, and he runs a business and he's had a lot of success and he's grown a lot and expanded, and he feels like he's the big fish in the small pond, but he wants to be the small fish in the big pond. So he wants to move to LA for that reason because it'll push him. You know, there's more people. That's why he's picked it. So it's along the same lines. Um, but yeah, just generally, like picking environments that will serve you better is not necessarily easy because they're not always available. Um, like I don't know if it's always an option just to move to Berlin if for some reason you think Berlin suits you the best. And maybe what do you think of like, okay, so there's environment, but what about studying philosophy? Where does that fit in, like in terms of how much of that is the uh, ingredient? Because everyone, even if they don't read directly philosophy, they, you know, usually when they want to change, they'll read stuff like self-help books, or they'll read um, something where philosophy comes through, some form of usually especially self-empowering. Even though a lot of self-help is like, I don't know, a bit wishy-washy. There's some elements of it that are self-empowering. So in that sense, that you know tries to give someone autonomy and tells them they can live their own life, and so that's a form of philosophy. So yeah. Anyway, to in short, like what you know, there's an environment, but where do you see philosophy fitting into that?
Well, the environment would just be a matter of changing, just simply changing without any
Okay.
direction in mind.
Okay.
Philosophy would set a direction.
Okay.
Like at least you're on a trajectory that you have some idea where you're going
Okay.
and starting to build habits in the right direction.
Uh,
Like you're putting yourself in a new potential or a new environment where you basically hit reset. And you just gotta start over.
mhm.
Like just do it right from here. And if
Yeah.
you don't have that philosophy in mind, you could end up where you started anyway. If you don't change the trajectory, like you could reset and go back to where you started, but then go the same direction again.
Yeah, I think so. Um, Yeah. Okay. So maybe environment is just like a helpful trigger to help you reset association. So if you've already got a plan in place, that it's useful. But otherwise, it's like you can just fall back into the same.
Or even creatively can help too. Like I think David Bowie mainly did it for creativity though. And he was able to reset his way of doing music.
Hmm.
That he did accomplish. And that's what I mean by like, you know, you're gonna change your trajectory. You just need to find the direction.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. Um, let's have a look at this next thing. So this is about values. A man can accept a set of values, yet betray them in action. He can actively evade the steps their achievement would require, or he can simply default on the responsibility involved. What's the difference between evade and default? Like, what would it mean for me to default on the responsibility, and what, like, if I evade the steps required for the achievement, what's...
I think he means more default, like in, like give up on. Like when you default on a loan, it's not that, like you just don't care about it anymore in a sense.
Oh, okay.
It's not that you're evading, it's just like...
You don't think you can do it.
Something like that. Just
Yeah.
you default on it, it doesn't matter anymore.
Okay. Well, that's what you say. But then is a value like the same? Do you think there's a distinction between value and a desire? Like how do I, because if I can betray it in action, then it's, you don't think there's a difference?
Not in terms of desire. I think desires are types of values. I mean, he's just illustrating here a contradiction. A man who can accept a set of values and betray them. Like, you accept them, but you don't at the same time, which is obviously a contradiction, and hence all these other problems he's talking about, because it's a contradiction.
Sorry, explain that again.
Like, if you have a set of values,
yeah,
you wouldn't betray them. It's just saying that this person is contradicting himself. That by accepting the values, but also betraying them, like, how can you do both? Like, at some level.
So they're not values once he's betrayed them.
From a normative sense that we're coming from, that maybe they ought to be values, or he sees them as values, but he's contradicting himself when he's betraying them. You might say that the values cannot be attained. You might say that they're impossible values.
Oh, okay.
They're invalid values or something like that. Or you could say that they're improper values. But all we can really say for sure here is like, what we can say for sure that this person is contradicting himself. He's acting with regard to it as being a value, but at the same time acting as though it's not a value.
What would be the acting? So I understand if he betrays them in action, he's acting that it's not a value, and then what would be the part that is him accepting them as, like, him desiring them? That would be the part that's the contradiction, desiring and then not acting on. Or like if I desire something and don't act on that, if I think it's a proper to pursue it, then is that a contradiction?
Well, an example would be somebody saying maybe like, like, just imagine valuing, say, a person's company, and no, I don't like that example. Well, why don't you pick a value? Like, what's something? Just pick any kind of value, not even your own. Just.
Yeah, no, I'll pick my own. Let's do that. So, well, one thing that I've wanted to do more of is surfing, and I haven't, like, I've gone once or twice, but because it's an hour away and I have to hire a board and all, I've like often just not, and like other things have come up, and like, you know, this friend wants to hang out, and it's sort of something in the background where I've just like, I said I'd want to make it a value by choice, and it's not. I've gone like once or twice, so maybe that's a good example to look at.
Yeah.
Because that's, I don't know if is that a desire or yeah. Anyway, what do you think of it?
Well,
How does
I think
that fit into?
as a desire, it's fine to call it a value. Go to something you want and something you want to pursue.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense. We're not trying to analyze it like normatively or whatever. We're just looking at it just how it is. Just you want to surf. It's something you desire. You find it valuable. Like,
okay.
Or think it's a value. It's just.
So we're just assuming I desire it, it's value. Okay, cool.
Yeah, but then from there we can think about, well, do you say you do that, but then every time you have an opportunity to surf, like, oh, today I have time, like, oh, but I don't feel like it, or I'm not going to bother buying a surfboard today because I'd rather, I don't know, watch TV all day instead. I mean, there's choices like that. Like, yeah, sure, you say you value it, but it seems like you're betraying that desire, betraying that value even. Like, you say it's important, but then you don't act as if it really is.
Yeah, although it gets trickier if we use the example from me, because there are other things that I do instead.
Right.
And so they're also values. And so that's like, I don't know,
Yeah.
I don't know if that yeah, anyway.
It wouldn't be, in your case, it probably wouldn't be betraying. I'm just saying, imagine a person, if you did that, it would probably be betraying your value.
Yeah.
But if you're saying your hierarchy of values is different, that surfing is just lower than other things, well, that's not necessarily betraying it. It's just you're acting consistent with all your values. Like, it might be less important than, I don't know, gardening or something. That gardening actually is more important. And surfing is just something like, oh, we need to try. And I'd probably value it, but it's not like that's going to take precedent over, say, taking care of your plants during a dry spell or something like that.
This is, yeah, I agree that. So it depends on where it fits. And this actually where it does get into this later, what you're talking about. So, he can choose to live. So the part that it gets into it, the full context of knowledge and values, that the full context of knowledge and values is what's relevant to that.
Yes.
But, can choose to live and act out of focus, to drop the discipline of purpose. I don't, always having a purpose, I assume. Ignore hierarchy, brush aside knowledge, and surrender to the spur of the moment, which is all the same thing, I think. But
more or less.
Drift, pushed by random factors. So full context of knowledge and values, though, even that is not easy. Like, it's not necessarily easy to go, what do I value more, surfing or this? And then go, here's surfing. How do I feel? Oh, this is ranked higher in feeling than this value. Like, integrating everything into a hierarchy of values seems like it's pretty hard to me. Like, I mean,
it is.
Yeah, that's
but I think that's still pretty distant from betraying your values. I mean, that's pretty strong wording there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, those are the considerations that we must make when we're thinking about, are we acting consistent with regard to our values and goals? And then you would look at, well, given that value about surfing, how does it fit in with everything else? Maybe I'm overvaluing something else, that I should do less of something else, because I'm starting to realize that it's not serving my life as I thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you might abandon, I don't know, becoming good at a pool or something. Like, you might realize that that was a good idea, but now I'm just not valuing it much. I'm just not going to do it anymore. You're just going to drop it.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, betraying values is much stronger. A good example might be going back to the book I'm reading, Musashi, when Matahachi, one of the characters, abandons. They both end up in this house, and they're going to head back to their own home village, but Matahachi decides to run away with this lady because he's like very attracted to her, but he's got a wife in his other village, and so that completely changes his life. That would be I assume his wife and his family were a value. So running away would have been a betrayal of, like, just acting exactly this, acting on a sudden urge, and moved by whim, and then betraying something else that's actually got much more importance for you. Although in the moment, it doesn't necessarily feel that way, which is,
Right.
Yeah. And there's probably methods that could be developed for thinking about this better in psychology, because I don't know if there is, but like, how do you weigh each factor emotionally? Because I know Eugene Gendlin did some work on the felt sense, which is like a method of introspection and like trying to uncover what premise drives the emotion. And so there's probably room for someone to do stuff on this too, because I don't know if there's anything on that. Okay. Let's see what else I've got here. Would you consider this if there's like a thing you value and you just say, oh, I'll do it later without specifying, is that a time? Because you know there's that quote from the Talmud, the Hillel the elder said, if not now, then when? So if you say, oh, I'll just do it later, would you say that's default? Is that a form of, because you're choosing not to think about it, you know, you're like, yeah, I'll just figure it out. Later is not specified.
Yeah, I don't like the word default personally. Like, it's a awkward word to me. I'm not even sure how to use it correctly entirely. But as far as evasion, I mean, it depends. I hate that answer, but that often is the right answer. It depends on, well, do you do it habitually? Is it really a legitimate reason to put it off? Are you putting it off because...
Let's try find a concrete then.
Without specifying a time.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can think of just procrastination in general. Like, oh, I can write that paper tomorrow and I have 2 days to do it. But
that's specific. That's tomorrow. It's not later.
Okay.
I would say it's different if you're like, I think they're different. If you say like, okay, I don't want to do this now, I can't be bothered, but tonight at 8 p.m. I'm going to think about it, or tomorrow I'm going to look at it. Like that's very different from, yeah, I'll just do it later without ever having any sort of specific.
Yeah, I would be inclined to just say that's evasion. Like
Yeah.
a classic form of evasion, just like, I'll just do it later. Like, you're almost saying there's nothing else to it. You basically said there's nothing else in the thought, just do it later. Like, there's no why, there's no reason.
Oh, yeah. It's
just cause.
I just don't want to, yeah. And it's not even later because it's non-specific. It's just pushing away the thought. Like there's something pressing on you and you're just pushing it away. So it is evasion. Okay.
It's almost not even, I just want to do it later. Like, it sounds like there's barely even a want to. It's just like no words to it even. Just like grunting and just putting it aside and that's it.
Yeah.
Like not even a word.
Yeah.